Welcome back to Morning Joe. We're just before the top of the hour, and we're tracking a major political crisis in Ukraine this morning. Pressure is growing on President Volodymyr Zelensky to bring back a popular young defense minister that he dismissed last week, which has sparked days of protests. MS Now's Nick McCool brings us the latest.
It's deadline day for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, caught in a power struggle that has rocked the Ukrainian command and spilled onto the streets of Kyiv. Protesters in support of Mikhailo Fedorov giving Zelensky until today to reinstate the former defense minister. Fedorov ousted last week amid reported clashes with the military's commander-in-chief, Oleksandr Syrsky. Fedorov's innovations, like using drones to push further into Russia, have won him the admiration of Ukrainians.
He is trying to transform how Ukraine fights, and I think we're seeing a lot of the effects of that on the battlefield, with Ukraine now making a ton of advances.
But his reforms also put him in conflict with Syrsky, for some a symbol of the Ukrainian military's old guard, presenting the president with a dilemma.
Syrsky is an old-school Soviet-trained military officer that I think clashes with a lot of the young, innovative approaches from the 35-year-old. Zelensky had to make a tough choice. It's hard to lose your main general on the front that is leading the war. And so Zelensky chose to remove the defense minister.
On Tuesday night, Zelensky relenting to the protesters' other demand and firing Syrsky, replacing him with a younger officer backed by Fedorov. In interviews with MS Now, multiple Ukrainian lawmakers said they opposed Fedorov's dismissal after just 6 months on the job.
I would definitely reinstate him.
Oleksandr Mereshko is a member of Zelensky's party and chairs the parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee.
I was a little bit skeptical myself when he became the Minister of Defense, because I thought, okay, he doesn't have military background. But he proved himself that he's very effective.
Even some members of the opposition think the firing was a bad move, one welcomed by the enemy.
Dismissal of Minister Fedorov was taken very positively by Russians, and that should tell you something.
The shakeup comes as Ukraine has gained momentum in recent months, sparking fuel shortages with attacks on Russian oil refineries as their drones strike farther into enemy territory.
We have managed to find the Achilles heel of Russia. Putin tries to present himself, to portray himself as a guarantor of security for Russia. And when there are drones near Moscow, in Moscow, it ruins all his mythology.
But as Russian strikes still rain down, Ukraine now asking the West for even more help.
We need them to be able to defend our people and make sure that when you go to bed in Kyiv, you have a guarantee that you will wake up in the morning. Right now, it is the opposite of that.
Fedorov has said Zelensky offered him a role as an advisor, but he refused. And as for the new commander-in-chief, both Ukrainian MPs we spoke to reacted positively to the news of Syrsky's replacement. Back to you.
MS Now's Nick McCool with that report. Let's bring into the conversation Chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker, and contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, Molly Jong-Fast. Sam Stein, John Heilemann, and David Ignatius all still with us as well. It's a great group. David Ignatius, I got to admit, kind of baffled by this one. It feels like sort of an own goal from Zelensky, particularly at a moment when his side has momentum in this war. We're seeing the protests that was greeted this decision. Give us this, what's going on here?
So there was a bitter dispute between Fedorov, young, gifted technologist in his 30s, and the commanding general, Syrsky. And in the end, President Zelensky decided he had to do something about that feud, and he fired his defense minister. But the protests that have followed that, where young Ukrainians are out in the streets, has been, to me, a reminder of why Ukraine is doing so well in this war. It's because it's a vibrant democracy. It's because people care passionately about their military. One of the big complaints about Syrsky that Fedorov and others have had is that he was too easy to waste lives in unnecessary battles that could be fought now by drones, by the kind of modern warfare that Fedorov, young man, has pioneered. I spent time with Fedorov in January in Kyiv, talking about the ways
to be particularly noteworthy. Sam Stein, and it does come at a moment where, you know, Ukraine has momentum and seems to be getting a little bit of like support from Washington from unlikely places. Trump's rhetoric towards Ukraine has softened. You know, still, look, there's a limit. He hasn't really followed through with action yet, but he's been warmer towards Zelensky. And even Laura Loomer, who, yes, in many ways is a ridiculous figure, but does carry some weight in MAGA world. She's been in Ukraine the last couple of days. She had been an extraordinary Ukraine skeptic, really backing Russia. Yes, backing Russia in this conflict. But now she says she was wrong. She says she was lied to, and she's been very supportive of Kyiv. Ukraine skeptics really backing Russia. Yes, backing Russia in this conflict. But now she says she was wrong. She says she was lied to, and she's been very supportive of Kyiv.
Laura Loomer, the Walter Cronkite down with Loomer is one of the ways to do that. Are you struck by the idea here? Do you understand the purpose of this?
Zelensky has learned a lot in the year and a half since Trump came back and they had that famous blow-up in the Oval Office, right? Zelensky has been taught by his European friends and by American allies that you can't go directly against Trump, no matter how frustrating he might be, no matter how much he might seem to be in Putin's pocket. And instead, he's been much more clever about trying to find ways of getting to, Trump, at least, if not on his side, at least not actively against him. And Laura Loomer, as he rightly recognizes, has a voice in that world, crazy as that might sound.
It's crazy how far we've come from
really
the Oval
is.
Office meeting where
Trump, at least, if not on his side, at least not, actively against him. And Laura Loomer, as he rightly recognizes, has a voice in that world, crazy as that might sound.
it's crazy how far we've come from
really
the Oval
is.
Office meeting where they were at each other's
Yeah.
throats to this.
Yeah, much warmer rhetoric in recent weeks. We'll see if actions fall through, including potentially this Russia sanctions bill, which has been stalled for seemingly forever. So let's move now from the Ukraine to the Middle East. And the AP, the Associated Press, is saying that a series of explosions broke out near a military base hosting American forces in northern Iraq early today. An AP reporter heard at least 7 blasts in the city of Erbil in the country's Kurdish region. It comes as the U.S. and Iran exchange fire for the 13th straight night, with both sides showing no signs of slowing down. Axios reports that President Trump told the outlet yesterday he is seriously considering restarting major combat operations in Iran, including strikes that he says would be bigger than the ones carried out during Operation Epic Fury a few months ago. Trump said this: "I am considering a massive attack, bigger than ever before. I am close to making a decision. We're all set for it." Trump, however, acknowledged that such a decision would have consequences and stressed that he hasn't yet made a determination. That's according to Axios. As the stalemate continues, the New York Times reports that Iran rejected a U.S.
Made, neither one of which seems to be immediately in the offing.
Yeah, he seems to have no good options right now. Really none. And elsewhere in the Middle East, one day after the United States signed that nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia, President Trump appeared to put the future of that agreement in doubt. Trump took to social media to say that the deal is subject to Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords, referring to an effort from his first term to normalize relations between Israel and other states. The Saudis have so far refused, previously making clear that normalizing relations with Israel would first require Israel to create a pathway toward Palestinian statehood. When the deal was announced on Wednesday, there was no mention of that condition, which resembles a plan from President Joe Biden that ultimately fell apart. In fact, the normalization was close to happening before the October 7th attacks. So the future of this new deal, which allows the Saudis to build nuclear power plants using U.S. technology, possibly creating a path to enrichment, is now uncertain. And David Ignatius, I mean, Riyadh doesn't seem anywhere near agreeing to normalize relations with Israel, began because of the Palestinian question. And there was a lot of head scratching about this agreement to begin with. It doesn't seem like Trump was getting anything out of this, and we know he's very fond of the Saudis. And this is a moment where, MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, has said that if they believe Iran is on the path to a nuclear weapon, he'd build one too. And it's hard to imagine that being good for the stability of the region.
So this is another example where President Trump's foreign policy on issues of enormous importance changes literally every day. This agreement was announced, but the details were not specified. The immediate reaction of people who worry about proliferation of nuclear weapons in the Middle East was there don't seem to be safeguards. It appears that Saudi Arabia will be able to enrich uranium as part of this deal, but without the kind of checks and safeguards by the International Atomic Energy Agency that have accompanied other deals, that really worried people. Then the next day, we have the sort of addition, codicil, saying, oh, well, from President Trump saying Saudi Arabia will have to agree to the Abraham Accords. Talking to Arab sources overnight, I am told that it's extremely unlikely that absent some significant Israeli concession on the Palestinian issue, the Saudis, even strongman MBS in Riyadh, will feel comfortable making that agreement to join the Abraham Accords. So yet again, we have a Trump administration policy on a critical issue that involves nuclear proliferation where your head just spins. You really don't know in which direction it's going day to day.
And Molly, that's where I wanted to go with you. It's just part of this like overall incoherence. And I mean, America's adversaries and allies alike have no idea what to expect from Washington each and every day. And that just adds to the instability and at times violence we see around the globe.
It's funny because it's the Middle East is learning the lesson that Europe learned earlier in this administration, right? That everything is constantly shifting with the Trump administration.
On that, there was I forget which newspaper had it, a quote from a Saudi senior official being like, wait, the deal was done. What's happening? It's like, hi, did you just meet President Trump? That's how this works.
Right. And again, the larger problem of Europe having, he's squandered these great relationships with Europe with the whole Greenland thing. So you have a world that is just, it's so chaotic in a way that it doesn't need to be. A lot of self-inflicted injury here on the part of the Trump administration. I'm wondering, John Heilman, it tends to be the thinking is that Americans are not so involved in foreign policy. But Trump did, they don't vote on it, is what I mean to say. But Trump did run on this idea that he was not going to spend money abroad, doing wars, doing aid, doing anything. So here we are, and so much of this administration seems very focused on wars abroad. Talk to us about what you think we're almost, we're cruising into the midterms, what you think if this will affect voters and how it will affect voters.
I think there's certainly the starting point, which is the notion that Trump had spent 10 years telling people that we weren't going to be involved in dumb wars, endless wars, wars of choice, that the sense that he deviated from that has contributed to the larger picture, which is kind of that Trump is really focused on things that don't affect the real lives of real people, and that he's just the things that set him apart, the things where he was not a conventional politician, and that he was had kind of a voice on behalf of a lot of forgotten Americans. Those things have been kind of blown up by a lot of things. And the notion of Trump is just being like everyone else in Washington, and that he's kind of sold people a bill of goods has kind of undermined a lot of people's faith in him, including obviously people in the middle of the electorate, but a lot of people even who were in his base. And if you combine that with the kind of willful refusal to talk about the thing that most voters care most about, which is economics and affordability and prices. And in fact, not just not talk about it, but thumb your nose at it, mock it, as we brought on the show yesterday, back to affordability as a hoax and all of that, combined with rising prices that are the main impact, Molly, I think, of the war politically. If we could be in a war in Iran where it didn't cause gas prices to spike and where it wasn't causing the kind of global economic disruption that we're seeing, there might be a world in which voters would forgive it. But you pull all of that together, it's part of why the picture is so dismal for Republicans right now in all the polling data that we see, and why, if the election were held tomorrow, well, I mean, a lot of Republicans are glad the election is not being held tomorrow, because if it were held tomorrow, it'd be a wipeout.
Yeah, well said there. And Molly, you mentioned Greenland. We should note David Ignatius has a new piece about Greenland and the impact the United States' push for that territory has had on relations with normal allies. Check that out online now. David Ignatius, thank you so much. Still ahead here on Morning Joe, new polling out of Georgia shows that Republicans are falling behind Democrats in that key battleground. We'll show you where the state is split among voters. Plus, the Trump administration is imposing a new set of tariffs. We'll tell you how much the administration is taxing and its reasoning behind these new levies. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back. Midtown and almost.
Nice
here.
weekend shaping up here, right?
Finally,
Look at that.
it's been pretty brutal weather here in New
Yeah.
York between the storms and the heat and the humidity. We're in a nice stretch of weather right now. Let's hope it continues. Looks like it will through the weekend. Let's now, though, go where it's a little hotter, Georgia. New polling out of that Peach State shows that Democrats lead in both the Senate and gubernatorial races. In the race for the Senate, the AARP poll of likely voters shows that Democratic incumbent Jon Ossoff has a 9-point lead over his Republican challenger, Congressman Mike Collins. Ossoff also leads Collins by 20 points among independents and by 30 points among voters aged 18 to 49. In the open gubernatorial race, Democrat and former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms edges out billionaire Rick Jackson by 2 points, which is within that poll's margin of error. So that's close. Support in that race is split sharply by both age and gender. Bottoms leads by 23 points among younger voters, while Jackson has a 13-point advantage among voters over the age of 50. Jackson also leads among men by about 19 points, while Bottoms holds a 20-point advantage among women. I would say a couple of senior Democrats I've talked to in recent days like Bottoms' chances there. They think that certainly Democrats shifting in a good direction for them. But Sam Stein, let's go to you about the Senate race in particular. Jon Ossoff, 9 points. That's legit in a state that not long ago was solidly red, has now become more of a purpley swing state. And it speaks to the political environment, to be sure, but also Ossoff's talent, as many think that if you were to win this November, particularly by a margin like that, people will already start talking about 2028 for him as well.
Well, just one note of caution, that poll was taken before Trump attacked him as Pinky Herman, not Pee Wee Herman, accidentally.
Yeah.
So,
You're right, never mind.
You don't know how the numbers will change when the Pinky Herman attack comes in. It's a remarkable thing to watch Jon Ossoff ascend to these heights. A few years ago, he was a congressional candidate a few years ago in Trump's first term, and he had made a fairly spectacular run, but fell short. And now he's this kind of electoral Goliath here, and I'm not going to get into the 2028 speculation because for my own sanity, I don't want to do it. But to Peter, it does say something about the changing political tides that Ossoff is doing this, that Georgia looks, according to these polling data, to be trending Democratic. We've had a number of polls this week around the congressional generic ballot that show good times for Democrats. Everything is, around the spectrum, but it does seem like Democrats are shaping up for a good run, including in North Carolina, Georgia, and other parts of the South. Actually.
Yeah, no, in fact, I thought that Fox poll the other day was really fascinating on the enthusiasm gap, right? That 68% of Democrats say they are extremely enthusiastic about voting this fall versus like 57% among Republicans. And it's a 20-point gap if you take out the MAGA base. In other words, between Democrats and non-MAGA Republicans, there's a 20-point gap in enthusiasm. They are not happy with the choice they made 2 years ago. They held their nose. They decided to give Trump another shot, and they don't seem to be happy about it. Now, who knows, right? It's only July. Anything can happen. The economy could take a good turn or a bad turn. But I will, your sanity I'm worried about. My sanity I'm less worried about. I will say that the Ossoff thing is fascinating. I was with a group of college-age kids the other day, not kids, young people, asked them which Democrat they found most exciting, and Ossoff was the one they all talked about. So that gap in age in that poll in Georgia tells us something, too.
John, I'm curious. It strikes me that what's happening in Georgia is not so different as what's happening in Arizona, which is you have swing states where MAGA is nominating Republican candidates, and they are having trouble with indies. I mean, when you look at those polls, indies are not buying it. They're not MAGA voters. And so in a swing state, MAGA really helps Democrats. Are you seeing that, and where are you seeing that? And do you think I'm getting high on my own supply here?
No, I think that's clearly a dynamic here that's important. And Molly, in Georgia in particular, it was worth saying, Georgia is a purple state. It's not a blue state yet, and the most successful Georgia Republican, who was the one person who's defied Donald Trump, was Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp, part of what happened in this race with Ossoff, and it's worth going back to think about this, when people talk about what were the blue states that Democrats were at risk of losing, there was a reason why a year ago people thought that there was a chance they would lose Georgia, which was that people thought Brian Kemp was going to run for governor or run for senator. Brian Kemp had challenged Jon Ossoff to be a very different picture. Instead, he decided not to run for Senate, and then the party decided to go with not the candidate that Brian Kemp endorsed, but the candidate that Donald Trump endorsed, endorsing Mike Collins. So this is take nothing away from Jon Ossoff. He's had a very strong year. He's been a fundraising juggernaut. He's figured out how to do both the traditional stump speeches that also play on social media. His documentarian's background has helped him, but also he got the right opponent in the very, very heavily, to your point, a very MAGA Republican in a state that has never been about MAGA Republicans. They've been about Brian Kemp Republicans. So Democrats, a lot of things have broken the right way to make now Georgia not, I would say no one's going to say it's safe, but now everyone in the Democratic Party is focused in terms of what they might cough up the ball on is focused on Michigan and Maine, and more Michigan now than Maine. And we've seen this polling that Jonathan and I were talking about. We're going to see tomorrow at this Maine SNAP convention. Graham Plattner's replacement has now to be chosen, and it looks like the new polling suggests that he is going to come into that race with a 3-point lead in the first polling over Susan Collins. So some Democrats have been kind of like, maybe we're going to survive the Plattner implosion. After all, it's obviously still going to be a close race, but it's not the fallout from that, at least at first blush, is not as negative as people feared it might be after.
Potentially not as catastrophic.
And another beneficiary of that, Arizona, Katie Hobbs, for Senate, for governor.
Yeah, no, exactly right. There definitely seemed, and there are some, like she's got a tough race. She does. But there are Democrats growing more and more bullish as they look around the map and as that we approach the midterms by the day. We're in late July now.
A lot of fear about Michigan, though.
Yeah, Michigan's the exception to that. Michigan's the exception to that, but we shall see. That's a hotly contested primary that's coming up in just a week or so. Up next here on Morning Joe, President Trump has hit dozens of countries with a wave of new tariffs. We're going to run through what it means for those trading partners and for the American buyers who end up footing the bill. That's next. Citing concerns over weak enforcement of forced labor restrictions. The new 10 and 12.5% tariffs, which take effect today, will cover more than 99% of U.S. imports, but includes numerous exemptions, such as oil, gas, fertilizer, and certain food items. The new tariffs come the same day that the president's global 10% tariffs are set to expire after a 150-day deadline and stem from a U.S. trade investigation that found that 60 trading partners failed to adequately enforce bans on forced labor imports. However, critics argue the probe is being used to justify Trump's broader tariff agenda. This is the latest example of the White House looking for alternative ways to impose tariffs on foreign nations after the Supreme Court struck down Trump's ability to unilaterally require them earlier this year. And now a joint ceremony planned for today to celebrate the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge, which connects Detroit, Michigan and Windsor, Ontario, is no longer expected to take place after Trump imposed 50% tariffs on most Canadian goods earlier this week. The president announced he is using a section of the Tariff Act of 1930 to impose the levies in response to what the administration calls discriminatory Canadian trade practices against the U.S. Canada now plans to hold its own ribbon-cutting ceremony today after officials said the two countries were still working to resolve outstanding issues. It's unclear whether the U.S. will hold a separate event. Trump also raged about putting more tariffs against Canada because of the wildfire smoke that came down from Northern Ontario to the U.S. earlier this week and last. Peter Baker, you know, President Trump, I can't imagine there are that many Republicans who see this news and go, great, the tariffs are going to continue, because they've been so politically unpopular and, in the eyes of most economists, hurting the nation's overall fiscal health, but also, in particular, just your average Americans.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how much effect it has. As you rightly point out, it's replacing a tariff that's now going out of effect. And so in that sense, it's not a dramatic change as of today, but it's one more X factor in an economy that doesn't feel to many Americans like it's doing that well. And with the Iran war now heating up again, oil prices shooting up, we're heading into a fall in which people basically feel quite uncertain about where things are going. Obviously, the stock markets are still doing well overall, but in everyday lives, people are seeing the price of the pump, the price of the gas, and the grocery stores and everything so much higher. The president likes to brag that inflation came down in June. That's true, but it's still far higher than not far higher, but it's higher than it was when he took office. He promised he would get rid of inflation effect and make prices come down. They have not come down. They continue to go up. And that Fox poll we were talking about the other day shows that Democrats are doing better than Republicans on the economy and inflation by 9 and 10 points. That's a huge reversal for a president who had made his bones in the first term on being some sort of an economic genius.
Yeah, Trump has very few consistently long-held beliefs. One of them is this. He has long said his literal favorite word is tariffs. Still ahead, everybody stick around. President Trump continues to sow doubt in U.S. elections ahead of the midterms. And while he's doing so, a nonpartisan organization is bringing together people from different political fronts to promote the democratic process, small d, across the country.
At the end of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, a prominent Philadelphia woman asked Ben Franklin, "Doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" His famous reply, "A republic, if you can keep it."
That explainer from 60 Minutes came just days after the insurrection at the Capitol back in 2021. Now, more than 200 years after the Constitutional Convention, and amid the Trump administration's efforts to undermine trust in elections, a nonpartisan civic education organization known as Keep Our Republic is pledging to do just that. Joining us now, two members of that group. Former Chief Justice of the Hawaii Supreme Court, Mark E. Rechtenwald, who serves on the organization's Alliance of Former Chief Justices, and former Republican Congressman James Ribble of Wisconsin. He is a member of the bipartisan Wisconsin Advisory Council. Our thanks to you both for being here. Mr. Chief Justice, I'll start with you. Why is there such urgency to launch this right now?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First, I mean, the elections are coming, and I think we need to build trust and confidence among the public. And secondly, from my point of view, we need to emphasize to the public the independence of the courts, the importance of the rule of law, and that judges decide cases based on the law and the facts. They're not partisans. And so the courts have had a very important role to play, and folks should be confident that they will get a fair shake when they come in front of our courts, and that we'll apply the law and not be partisans.
So, Congressman Ribble, you co-authored a piece for Time with former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett titled, "We're Conservative Republicans, the SAVE Act is a Mistake." In it, you co-write in part this: real election integrity requires accuracy. It requires transparency. It requires telling voters what is true, even when the truth is less politically useful than the fear. We believe Republicans can be the party of secure elections, limited federal power, competent administration, and personal responsibility. The Save America Act, as written, does not live up to those principles. The American people deserve election laws that make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. Election confidence is built by facts, transparency, and trustworthy administration, not by panic, paperwork, and political ultimatums. It's okay. Molly, I mean, that's what's seemingly a non-controversial point, but yet we're not hearing it from all that many Republicans.
Yeah, and my question is for the congressman, the former congressman, why are we not hearing this from more Republicans? Like, obviously, this is a real issue. There's a lot of anxiety about these midterms. It does not necessarily serve either party to feel that the elections are somehow in peril. Why do you think there's not more speaking out about this?
Well, ultimately, I think we're living in an era of populist outrage, and the outrage machine starts moving people for political advantage. And we're also living in an era of extreme tribalism, where the party identification is more important than a principal identification. And one of the reasons that Governor Clark and I wanted to write that op-ed is because we wanted to let the American people know that you can have confidence in your elections. And I'm stop and think about when you go and cast your vote, who are you likely to see? Some senior citizen from your community who's checking your ID, who's checking you in, making sure you're from the address you claim you're from, and doing all the safeguards that are typical for elections. And our message is, don't really trust the politicians, but trust your neighbor. And our elections are safe and secure right now. And so let's not discourage people from voting by telling people that they're not safe.
Chief Justice Rechenwald, I'm curious, as you sat and watched Donald Trump give his primetime address on election security the other night, what your main takeaways from it were, and in a kind of tangible way, whether you kind of share the kind of ambient sense of concern that a lot of Democrats have that by the time we get to November, that the president himself is going to be trying to put his thumb on the scale in some way and interfering with the election outcomes in the midterms.
Well, certainly there have been a lot of developments in the last month that are cause for concern, from the FBI, hundreds of FBI agents reviewing records from Georgia to various attempts to keep people from being able to vote, to getting voting records from various states. So there's a whole lot going on, and I think we're about at the time when folks are really going to begin to focus in as we enter the fall season and Labor Day. So to me, I think everybody needs to be ready. We need to think through where we are. We need to prepare, and I think that's been happening. And I'd echo what the congressman says. We have a strong electoral system in this country. It's not perfect. We can always work to improve it. But the folks who are in these states have worked hard to get ready for this election, to be able to have relatively clean voter rolls, to make sure they're as up-to-date and accurate as possible. And I think if the courts are called on to step in, they're going to be neutral and fair, just like they should be, and not be partisans. It won't matter if the judge was appointed by a Republican or a Democrat. They'll call it like they see it. And I think that's a critical message for people to hear.
Congressman, hi, it's Peter Baker from the New York Times. There's a strain of thinking on the left, and maybe even from other Trump critics, that there's something going on here from the president that goes beyond simply discrediting elections or causing suspicion in elections, that he's actually laying the groundwork for potentially doing something more direct in the fall should the vote not go his way. And that may seem overly paranoid, but on the other hand, he told my colleagues in an interview in January that he regretted not ordering the National Guard to seize voting machines in 2020 in states that he lost. And I'm curious what you think the public should think of that. Is there a concern that these elections might not be carried out free of interference from the White House?
Well, certainly that's a concern, but I don't know that anybody can really get into President Trump's head at any given moment of time, and I don't really feel that I can do it. But I can say this: if anybody thinks that it's better for the federal government to manage voter rolls, just stop and think. The Department of Homeland Security has been responsible for managing E-Verify for employers to check whether a candidate for work is legal to be in the country. And they have, since 2002, they still have a 50% miss rate. And so where they say someone is legal, but they're not. And so to turn it over to the federal government doesn't make any sense to me when the states have already shown that the system already works. And I think the president's going to say what the president's going to say at any given moment of time. And my message is that all that does is engender fear and lack of confidence. And if you think your vote is going to be stolen, as it were, why would you go vote at all? And so I think that just serves to suppress the vote rather than actually encourage people to go out and vote and exercise their democratic responsibility.
Members of the Keep Our Republic organization, former Chief Justice Mark E. Rechenwald and former Republican Congressman Reed Ribble of Wisconsin, thank you both very much for being with us, but also for this important work.
It's great to be with you.
So, John Hammond, I mean, this is obviously a timely conversation. The president, just a week or so, used the White House, primetime address, to make completely spurious claims, no evidence whatsoever, about the 2020 election. And yeah, he's a sore loser there. But it's more than that. It's about setting up 2026, potentially 2028, to if not outright meddle, but at the very least, cast results in doubt if he doesn't like them. And he undermining the faith of our elections that's the fundamental tenet of our democracy. It's very, very troubling.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to the tangible fears that people have, you know, Trump telegraphs a lot of punches that he doesn't then throw, but every punch that he does throw is one that he's telegraphed. So it's like you have to take him seriously when you hear the consistency with which he talks about this suggests that you'd be nuts not to take seriously, Molly, the possibility that the president has some plan or at least an impulse to try to actively interfere in the election. And Peter Baker made the point a second ago, which is, again, worth reminding people that, you know, he said on the record to the New York Times that he regrets that he didn't seize the ballot box in 2020. And the thing that I think about here is all of the Democrats that you and I and Jonathan talked to, who for the last year have been saying, we have to take Trump seriously. They have a meta conversation about we have to take this seriously. But then they don't really seem like they're doing anything. And finally, this week, Chuck Schumer started calling these closed-door sessions on the Hill, where he's kind of like, let's start doing some wargaming on these doomsday scenarios. Do you feel like Democrats, although there's like a consensus that this is a real threat that Trump will try to interfere, do you feel as though they're actually doing the things that they need to do to get ready to fight back?
I think that there are a lot of nonpartisan voter organizations that are ready to take all of this to court. And I think that they have learned a lot with this administration does very poorly in court, usually, because a lot of the stuff.
Because they're bad lawyers, for one thing. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of the stuff they're trying to do is not legal. And so the courts say, no, you can't do that. And so I think that is something real. Peter Baker, I am curious, the administration also lost in court with the New York Times this week, and I'm wondering if you could just talk about that.
Yeah, the subpoenas the administration issued to some of my colleagues over their reporting on the new Air Force One were withdrawn yesterday by the Justice Department after a judge in New York lashed the department for not following procedures, for not being fully forthcoming with the court, and so on. It was a pretty tough showing for the Justice Department. And they not only went after some of my colleagues, they tried to get the phone records from some of my colleagues' family members, including the mother of one of my colleagues, the spouses of a couple of my colleagues. And apparently they did that in error. They got the wrong numbers. They didn't even know the right numbers to go after. The judge was pretty harsh on them. This is part of a broader, campaign, of course, by the president against the media, trying to intimidate or, pressure the media. We were in court in Florida this week in a civil case that the president has filed against the New York Times, separate from those subpoenas. We had a motion to dismiss heard by a judge. We'll see what the judge says on that. So it's part of a broader pattern. He's sued the BBC, he sued the Wall Street Journal, of course, previously CBS, ABC, using the FCC to put pressure on broadcasters. It's not a one-off, this subpoenas that he issued this week, or his Justice Department tried to issue this week. This is a part of a broader pattern.
Yeah, an all-out assault on the press and their ability to do its job. Still ahead here on Morning Joe, the Department of Defense appears to lower the number of U.S. troops killed in the war with Iran listed on its website.
Communism is the single greatest threat to our country and its history, including even World War I and World War II, Pearl Harbor, 9/11. I think it's the greatest threat that I've ever seen to our country.
That's right. That's right. Communism is the greatest threat to our country, even more than the looming threat of World War I. That is what the president believes, although I think someone else might disagree with him.
The threat that we have, the biggest threat, is nuclear war. I think that the border is the biggest threat to this country. Our biggest threat remains the sick, sinister, and evil people from within our country. The weaponization of law enforcement is the greatest threat. Our biggest threat to democracy is stupid people.
Might actually be right with that last one.
And we have actually a very, very busy morning this morning, so we're going to get started right away, beginning with the Middle East. The United States and Iran exchanged fire for the 13th straight night, with both sides showing no signs of slowing down. Axios is reporting that President Trump told that outlet yesterday that he's seriously considering restarting major combat operations in Iran, including strikes that would be bigger, he says, than the ones carried out during Operation Epic Fury. Trump said this: "I am considering a massive attack, bigger than ever before. I am close to making a decision. We're all set for it." Trump, however, acknowledged that such a decision would have real consequences and stressed that he has not made a final determination yet. That's according to Axios. And of course, we know he has talked big before and not followed through. We shall see. So as the stalemate continues, the New York Times reports that Iran rejected a U.S. ceasefire proposal that was presented to them by the Iraqi prime minister, who was in Washington earlier this week. Iranian officials tell the Times that it was the only offer on the table and that their government was not interested in a temporary deal that left the question of control over the Strait of Hormuz unresolved. That key waterway, of course, remains at the center of the conflict. Trump yesterday claimed that any damage to ships will be paid for with frozen Iranian funds. Iran's foreign minister responded that such a move would set an incendiary precedent. So, David Ignatius, let's start here. The president suggests we could be on the precipice of a major resumption of hostilities. As I noted, he has done that before without following through. But there certainly does seem to be a growing frustration out of Washington about where things stand. We are now, 10 days plus, 13 days of strikes. The Strait of Hormuz is very much not open and free and fair for all. And negotiations seem to be going nowhere. What's the latest you heard about what could be next?
So, Jonathan, I hear that he feels trapped in the situation. He has wanted to get out of this war. He, in effect, is making the same, I fear, misjudgment that he made at the beginning, which is to think that hitting targets harder in Iran will lead the Iranian regime to capitulate, that they're so weak that surely they can be made to submit to American pressure militarily. It didn't happen at the beginning of the war when it started in February 28. It doesn't seem to be happening in this latest round when the president returned to combat. So he keeps dialing up the level of U.S. attacks, and there's no sign the Iranians are prepared to capitulate. They think that if they push back hard, and they've been doing that, actually killing American soldiers by firing on bases in Jordan in particular. They believe that is going to force the U.S. to make further concessions. So it's a terrible situation for President Trump. I've watched presidents face similar situations with the Vietnam War, with Iraq and Afghanistan. In the end, with those wars, American troops ended up basically deciding to pull out. It simply wasn't achievable. President Trump isn't at that point yet, but he faces a series of terrible decisions that could make this war much more costly.
Yeah, I wrote earlier this week about that exact bind that he is in. Some in his party urging him to cut and run right now to try to save the GOP's chances in the midterms. Others saying no, escalate despite what could be a significant cost, both in terms of politically, but also maybe in American lives. And this conflict is hot. In fact, the AP reports this morning that one of their journalists in Iraq heard several explosions near a U.S. base there. Now, doesn't know what caused the explosions. We, of course, will continue to monitor this, but there were more strikes last night in the region. We will keep you posted. Meanwhile, the New York Times is pointing out that the number of U.S. troop deaths in the Iran war suddenly appeared lower on the Pentagon website this week, dropping from 18 that was listed on Wednesday down to 14 listed yesterday. 3 military officials tell the paper that one reason behind the change was the Trump administration decided to remove the 4 service members killed this past weekend from the list, took them off it, because their deaths occurred after President Trump declared a ceasefire in the war in April. Now, the acting press secretary for the Pentagon, however, attributed the change to temporary data disruptions on the website that he suggested would be quickly fixed. But Sam Stein, this wouldn't be the first time that the government, that the Trump administration has tried to doctor things to make the president look better. It is a nonsensical argument that these 4 lives would matter less because they happened after a ceasefire was declared, when obviously the ceasefire is over. There are major strikes happening in the region now for well more than a week. To me, this was particularly outrageous and disgraceful.
Well, to me too. It's both not shocking that the Trump administration would do this, and it's shocking that it happened. What is the actual goal of doing something like this? Is it to try to limit your political exposure for the war? Is it try to cover up the actual costs of the engagement that you launched with Iran? Or is the American public somehow going to say, okay, we can stomach this more because it's not 18, it's 14? It's despicable, honestly. It's failing to own the consequences of their actions, or at least trying to avoid the consequences of their actions. And honestly, it's insulting to the people who sacrificed, to say, hey, this was not actually a war casualty. It was, a casualty of what's the word he uses, skirmish? I found this to be among the more offensive moves that the administration has made politically, but it obviously reflects a larger thinking that they have internally, which is that this is politically problematic and they need to sort of put their fingers on the ledger here. And Trump is open about this all the time. The other day, he put out some post on Truth Social where he was comparing the casualty counts and the costs of different wars, Vietnam, Iraq, and Iran, as if, we're lucky that we've only had 18 sacrifices here. It's how he views this conflict, not necessarily through the human sacrifice, but the political cost that he has to incur. And, you can only imagine the other stuff they are covering up, because if they're willing to cover up the deaths of 4 U.S. service members, what do we know about the actual cost of the war? What do we know about our munitions level? It raises a whole host of other questions. And frankly, I feel very sorry for the families of these 4 people who we're putting up here, that they have to now be dragged through this political debate about whether their sacrifice counts as a war casualty or not.
Yeah, the callousness here is off the charts, but perhaps not surprising. I agree with you, Sam. Remember, President Trump in his first term called those who were reportedly called those killed in combat suckers and losers for that sacrifice, John Heilemann. But it's beyond just the lack of any humanity. It's also, to a larger point, we can't trust what the U.S. government, the Pentagon, the White House is saying about this war. We haven't gotten a Pentagon briefing since early May. We've been reporting in the Washington Post, New York Times, other places. They've really downplayed the number of service members who have been injured in these attacks. The American people simply don't know what's going on.
I mean, with respect to the war, it's particularly egregious. Jonathan, we were talking about this on the show maybe earlier this week, where, throughout the course of the 5 months almost now that the conflict's been going on, you've seen this game playing with numbers. And so the overstatement of the success of our strikes in the early phases of the war by Pete Hegseth. How much did we control the skies? How much had we taken out of Iran's ballistic missile capacity? And then the understatement of how much damage Iran had done, again, to direct U.S. assets and to assets of allies in the region, where we find that those have all been understated. And, the great symbolism here is the fact that Pete Hegseth has, basically totally has banned the former Pentagon press corps from the Pentagon briefing room, and it's now stocked with some of the most ludicrous examples of non-news operations and propaganda outfits that you can imagine. The government throughout, in a thoroughgoing way, it's the least reliable in terms of the statistic it puts out and the claims that it makes of any government in our lifetime. And it's particularly acute in this crucial agency right now at a time of war. And I think, the watchword now with this group, and it's not overstating to say, and I think I cited this the other day, that Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan had been saying that, we've gotten to a place where if you cover this administration, your presumption has to be they are lying, and you are open to being proven otherwise. But in the past, we basically sort of thought, well, we give you the presumption of you telling the truth, and we try to poke holes, see if we can find places where you're lying. It's the 180 degrees out now, and that is a really depressing state of affairs.
Coming up, we've got a pair of great discussions lined up for you. First, Joe is joined by our good friend, Eddie Glaude Jr., to talk about the long arc of history when it comes to racial justice. Plus, a selection of the must-read titles to understand America.
At the headlines to see. You can see